and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
CBS Mornings, weekdays on CBS.
Tonight, with the House Speaker removed, what can actually get done in Congress? And as healthcare workers strike, the patient services that will be most impacted. Then, a new manufacturing boom, where the jobs are being created on the CBS Evening News.
The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
True leadership would have made sure that those appropriation bills were completed by June 30th. I say that this was an engineered crisis of Kevin McCarthy's doing.
It's about raising campaign contributions, millions and millions of dollars. I think it's disgusting and some of the swappiest behavior you can have.
More than anything, we need to change the poisonous atmosphere in Washington.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Let's discuss animals, politics, and the House of Representatives. They are all, as you will see, related. Here are the animals: tiger, crocodile, scorpion. Now, please, stay with me. In another era and faced with another foe, in this case Nazi Germany, President Franklin Roosevelt said this: "No man can tame a tiger into a kitten by stroking it." Another luminary of that era, Winston Churchill, said this about appeasement: "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last." The point is that things that menace always menace. They will not be tamed or fed into submission. Republicans, beholding the ouster of Speaker Kevin McCarthy, said today that they could see this coming all the way back in January when McCarthy made concession after concession to hard-right members of his conference. Those concessions continued throughout his short reign as Speaker on policy on January 6th, on the impeachment inquiry of President Biden. McCarthy stroked the tiger and fed the crocodile. Now he's gone. Which brings us to the scorpion. Others are now vying to succeed McCarthy. Majority Leader Steve Scalise and Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan so far, and there could be more. All potential successors will become rivals and therefore metaphorically have to sting one another. Still, other Republicans will vie for vacancies they leave behind, generating other rivalries. When I suggested today to well-placed Republicans that many scorpions were now entering the same jar of intrigue and political ambition, none disagreed. Tiger, crocodile, scorpion. Welcome to the zoo. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. He is not a zoologist, but he covers Congress. Scott, catch us up on the doings of the day.
Yeah, let me extend the analogy. The zoo is closed indefinitely. Take your tickets and go back home. The lights are truly off inside the U.S. House chamber. The doors are truly locked, and they're locked indefinitely. Half of the U.S. Congress is paralyzed as we speak, Major, with no end date to that. There's every expectation there could be more people jumping into this race to succeed Kevin McCarthy, more than just Congressman Scalise, more than just Congressman Jordan. And there is no expectation from anybody inside that this thing's going to wrap up in 1 week. And the House will not function until there's a speaker. And this is all happening at such a distinctively tenuous moment as we're racing towards a shutdown deadline and as funding for Ukraine is very much in question. I brought this to one of the Republicans who supported Kevin McCarthy today, Mark Molinaro of New York. Take a listen to how he characterized it. Does this make a shutdown in November more likely?
Well, listen, this delay and this undermining certainly makes this a very challenging next 40 days. The ability of Congress, however, to come to an agreement can happen almost instantly if members on both sides of the aisle acknowledge reality. We have a bipartisan government. The solutions that we will deliver for the American people have to be bipartisan.
Meanwhile, one of Mr. Molinaro's fellow New York Republicans, Mike Lawler, has called to excommunicate Matt Gaetz from the House Republican Conference and wants him kicked out because Matt Gaetz led this successful charge to oust Kevin McCarthy. That's the level of acrimony we're facing midweek here in the U.S. House.
And Scott, you were good enough on our behalf to talk to some of those who were involved in and supported the ouster of Speaker McCarthy. Congressman Good and Rosendale. Let's listen to your question and their answers from earlier today.
You voted to oust Kevin McCarthy without a known plan B. Who's plan B?
Well, what we want to have is a contest or a competition for a speaker, not a coronation like we had back in January. Now, it was a prolonged coronation, but he was the only serious challenger or contender because he was the presumptive speaker.
There's a lot of really, really talented individuals that have already raised their hand up, which goes to prove our point that we were making in January. Once the king is removed, we'll find out who else wants to run.
The king? The speaker's not a king. Small point, but it sort of speaks to the larger disconnect between reality and the language of the House of Representatives. Scott, catch our audience also up on some eviction notices that were handed out in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, in the past 24 hours, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and former House Democratic leader Steny Hoyer were evicted from their Capitol hideaway offices just behind me, the private studies that are given off the House floor for senior, high-ranking members of Congress. It happened to their surprise, and according to one of Kevin McCarthy's lieutenants, it was done because former Speaker McCarthy now needs a hideaway office in the Capitol, and he's going to take the one that belonged to Nancy Pelosi. This was done at Speaker McCarthy, former Speaker McCarthy's orders as he exited the position. But something else strikes me, Major. As I follow around through this day, the acting speaker, the Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, a particularly devoted loyalist to Kevin McCarthy. We keep asking him, what's next on the schedule? What happens next until there's a speaker? If he doesn't answer the question, there really are no answers. So it's not so much a matter of we don't know what's happening next with the U.S. House. The U.S. House doesn't know what's happening next with the U.S. House.
So, Scott, I want to play from you some sound from the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, who was regarding this situation askance, to be sure, and also understanding that one of the concessions that Speaker McCarthy made to win the speakership was having a single person being empowered to enter a motion to vacate. Let's hear what Senator McConnell had to say about the future.
I have no advice to give to House Republicans except one. I hope whoever the next speaker is gets rid of the motion to vacate. I think it makes the speaker's job impossible, and the American people expect us to have a functioning government.
Scott, to what degree, as best you can discern it, is that a conversation actively going on among House Republicans, and will they take that advice from the Senate Republican leader?
Now, you better believe there's a conversation as this speaker discussion begins, as these candidates start taking meetings. For example, Steve Scalise met today with the Texas Republicans and with the New York Republicans. This is going to be an issue, according to the rank and file with whom we're speaking, that you may want to change this rule. And this may be something one of the candidates needs to promise to secure the support of the moderates and those who are at this point so frustrated with the 8 GOP defectors who helped vote out Kevin McCarthy. And I'll just add this. Yeah, definitely. Not a day goes by where senators of either party don't seize the opportunity to dunk on the U.S. House whenever they can. But this is real. And I think the senators recognize the threat that is being posed now to the functioning of American democracy and the prospects of avoiding a government shutdown. The instability in the House is a dangerous thing. The senators recognize that, and their criticisms today, at least, are uniquely sober, and that this needs to get fixed soon.
Needs to get fixed soon. In that regard, let us listen to Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan. They both offered some sentiments today. We have them in order. Steve Scalise first, then Jim Jordan. Let's take a listen.
Right now, I've been just obviously listening to a lot of members and having a lot of really good conversations about how we keep focusing on the things we need to do to get our country back on track.
We need to pass the bills that need to be passed. We've done a lot of that. The biggest one, of course, is H.R. 2, the Immigration Border Security legislation. Frankly, I wish Chuck Schumer would bring it up.
So, Scott, at one level, those all seem like reasonable people saying reasonable things, but about a totally unreasonable set of circumstances. And as I mentioned in the open to this show, they will be vying against one another, which means they will have to appeal to Republicans to support them over another Republican. Even if others jump into this race, it'll be even more complicated in terms of trying to build a coalition. And as you mentioned in your first answer, there's still no timeline for any of this, correct?
That's right. What's more, They're both facing the same reality Kevin McCarthy faced, that there's going to be a handful of Republicans who love that motion to vacate rule. Look how they employed it this week. Look at the resonance they've received for doing so. Look at the platform they've been given over the past 24 hours to say what they want to say to America. And look how they were able to exact what they wanted to exact through using that tool. They're going to want to keep that tool. Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, and anybody else who jumps into this race is going to have to face that dynamic and cater to those members to win their votes. What happens next is far from certain, and that's true among both parties in the U.S. House. What are Democrats going to do? They're going to vote in unison for Hakeem Jeffries, but are they going to want to get involved with talking to one of these nominees, see if they can get some concessions? Maybe they can try to exert some leverage, but really, this is still an internal Republican battle and one that's going to play out over the next few days.
With deep thanks for your reporting and analysis, as always, Scott McFarland. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Kevin McCarthy did not walk quietly into the night after being ousted as House Speaker. We look at his reaction next. You are streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish
That
you and
we
I are going to
just-
have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
You need 218. Unfortunately, 4% of our conference can join all the Democrats. You all know Matt Gaetz. You know it was personal. It was all about his ethics. Nancy Mace is a whole nother story. Okay, well, she was on The View saying I didn't keep my word. Judge me by my enemies.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Kevin McCarthy with a few choice words for his Republican detractors, who say the decision to oust him as House Speaker was strictly business. Unprecedented business, we should add. And here's Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, his response to McCarthy's comments about that ethics investigation.
That's totally false. I'm the most investigated man in the entire United States Congress. I've been cleared by the FBI, DOJ, the Federal Election Commission.
But you don't think that McCarthy did enough to stop this? I mean, wasn't that well known that you were mad that he didn't do enough to stop that investigation? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being mad, by the way.
I'm not.
Margaret Brennan and Jonathan Martin joins us out of that chaotic little conversation. Margaret is, of course, CBS News' chief foreign affairs correspondent and, importantly, the moderator of Face the Nation. Jonathan, we affectionately refer to him as J. Mart, is senior political columnist for Politico. So there are times when a Sunday show has the interview of the week. Face the Nation had the interview of the week last Sunday with Kevin McCarthy. You conducted that interview, Margaret. You took stock of the speaker then. Your assessment of what's happened since.
I mean, it's a stunning turn of events between Sunday morning
He was
and where we
confident. He at least expressed confidence to you. Maybe he was a poker face, but he was there.
No, it was a victory lap, having pulled many rabbits out of many hats, as Senator Cornyn had said, and keeping the government funded, keeping the lights on, and what had seemed to be, all of us careening towards a government shutdown. And in that 11th hour, pulled it off, doing so with more Democrats than Republican votes, something that ended up being fairly central to the conversation we had the next morning. But it was overshadowed that morning in some ways by his nemesis, Matt Gaetz, going on 2 networks and saying he was going to issue this motion to vacate, which, of course, we know as part of that package to become Speaker, McCarthy had allowed for just one individual to initiate that process. But it was the course of that conversation that apparently changed some minds within the Democratic Party about whether they would help to keep him in power or not, because you had to get to that 218.
And some Democrats I've heard were a little put out, to put it mildly, when Speaker McCarthy did not suggest to them that they were helpful.
Right.
He scorned them. And they took that personally and said, wait a minute, we just helped you, and now you're laying down some fire against us? That didn't seem to ease the situation he was walking toward.
No, and it was a choice, and I think you can see, and of course, anyway, I was a little surprised at the choice he made and how he presented the argument, because you could have come forward and said, a majority of the Republican caucus voted for this. That would have been factually correct. And then said, and Democrats voted with us, and this is bipartisan. And that, at the end of our program, when we talked to Brian Fitzpatrick of the state of Pennsylvania, part of Problem Solvers, he was making the argument that this continuing resolution that was bipartisan proved bipartisanship was still viable, and a vote against McCarthy would have been a vote against that concept. McCarthy himself, though, didn't embrace that concept in our conversation. He went straight at Democrats, and it was a choice. I don't know why, but rhetorically, it is something that did trip him up, it would seem, given that the Democratic caucus used that as a rallying point while making the decision to get to that vote, to vote down McCarthy.
Jonathan, I want to bring you into the conversation. One of the specialties you have at Politico is taking what seem to be disparate events and putting together in a seamless pattern. What patterns, if any, do you see in the rise and then subsequent fall of Speaker McCarthy?
I think Kevin McCarthy is caught in history's fast rapids, Major, that he is a nice enough fellow who probably in an earlier time would not have risen to the speakership. But the party's in a place now where it wanted somebody that could try to, walk this line on Trump and Trumpism and appeal to folks who like President Trump in the caucus and also appeal to people who don't like President Trump. But he was never willing to pick a side on that great fight. And at every turn, he effectively tried to placate the hard right elements of his conference. And I think he paid a price for that because he had no Democratic friends at the end of the day. But to me, it's hard to see how a Democratic Party today, where the cardinal issue for them is Trump and Trumpism, would ever help a Republican speaker who they see as being a Trump enabler. And I think that ultimately was Kevin's challenge. The Democratic Party structurally today is just not going to help somebody who is part of the Trump MAGA movement, and they see Kevin as that person. So I think Kevin's caught up, Major, in the larger story of American politics in this moment, and frankly, is more of a vessel than anything else.
And I was texting with some Democrats today, Jonathan. I imagine you've heard some similar sentiments who said, well, Kevin McCarthy raised hundreds of millions of dollars in the last cycle for House Republicans. He knows districts around the country as well as any Republican. So from a strategic point of view, for Democrats, why would they help him stay on the field? It's better for them if he's off the field.
Well, I heard that from some pro-McCarthy sources myself today. I said, look, they said even if Kevin hadn't brought up the impeachment inquiry after Labor Day when Congress reconvened, the Democrats still would have collectively come for him because they don't want him to be on the field, as you put it, next year. They'd rather have a chaos narrative in the House than have somebody that can raise a lot of money against them. I tend to think that that's more of an open question. I think if Kevin McCarthy had not gone on Face the Nation and said what he did on Sunday, had not brought up the impeachment inquiry after Labor Day, I think it would have been possible for him to break a few Democrats away. But again, if you're a Democrat in the House and you look at everything Kevin has done, starting with January 6th in the aftermath, where he goes back to Mar-a-Lago that month and effectively offers Trump forgiveness, at every turn, Kevin has, enabled Trump. And if you're a Democrat, that really is a line that can't be crossed.
Margaret, one of the driving forces of the Sunday show and Face the Nation is to try to go to the people who have the answers. Mm-hmm. As far as I can tell, the big question, what happens next? There's no one to book. Who has the answers, right?
Having made a few calls myself this morning to people on the Hill, they are also having this conversation of how does this actually function when you have an acting speaker? What does that mean in the line of succession? What does that mean in terms of what we can actually do before there's an elected speaker, in terms of actually getting the people's work done, which, by the way, the politics around this are fascinating, but there's actual policymaking that needs to be done. We don't have a defense bill that is passed into law.
No one knows right now how to bring a bill to the floor. No one knows.
Right, exactly. Even if there were willed and action to do it, which there's not. But you have, we were on the brink of not having the FAA reauthorized, just for the very basic functioning of our air traffic. That's where we are. Basic governance, not even talking about changing border policy or Ukraine aid. A lot of the people's work is not getting done. And now there's this question of what can get done in the 40-odd days we have left before that November 17th continuing resolution expires. There is work being done behind the scenes. Sources have been telling me to coordinate with the Senate to try to move something along so that when there's a speaker, we aren't quite on the brink of shutdown.
Try to get things ready.
Get things ready, exactly, to hand off. But then you get us back to, as we're talking about, what is the alternative to Kevin McCarthy? And is that in any way more acceptable to Democrats and Republicans to vote on whatever it is that next speaker brings forward?
Exactly. Jonathan, about the minute we have left, how do you think the White House views this? And do you think this is a net plus in the context of a Biden-Harris reelection bid?
I think it is in the short term in the sense that it takes the attention off of Biden's troubles, namely his unpopularity and paltry approval ratings, and focuses on the Republican disarray. But I think, as Margaret points out, it creates a challenge for Biden in the medium term. Namely, how is Biden going to get the government funded next year? How is Biden going to get the money Ukraine desperately needs here out the door in the next few weeks? Major, you tell me the Republican speaker who is sworn in takes that gavel, and the first thing he or she does as speaker is to try to jam through an omnibus and a package for Ukraine. That's not going to go over that well in the GOP caucus in the House. So it's going to be a real challenge here for the next few weeks to get those basics done. I think what you'll see is an effort to pair a border security bill with Ukraine funding to try to sweeten it for the House GOP. I'm still not sure that they can get Ukraine through, even with a border security bill attached to it.
Challenges ahead. Margaret Brennan and Jonathan Martin, thank you so much. Today, President Biden addressed the story of the week, the historic ousting of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. What he had to say, that's next. You're streaming America Decides.
Weather turns extreme. CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Politics isn't a game. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? Politics is about policy. Was this the right way to actually get this done? I'm a voracious consumer of information, and I'm impatient. I don't like to be spun. To be moderator of Face the Nation is not an anchor, it's not an actress. You are up here to moderate a conversation. That means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The House will now reorganize and select a new speaker. I know it's going to take some time, but I remind everyone, we have a lot of work to do, and the American people expect us to get it done. The argument we reached was all about what comes next.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was, of course, President Biden addressing the vote to oust Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. I want to go now to CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, what the president was referring to is something we talked about in the segment just earlier. What's the future of Ukraine aid? And as I understand it, the president's going to have something to say about that in the not-too-distant future.
That's right, Major. He said today that he's going to have a major address that he'll be giving soon about Ukraine aid and how important it is, and filled with warnings about what it could mean for this country if the U.S. doesn't provide more Ukraine funding in the short term. Now, what's so striking about this is that just 24 hours ago, Major, the president told world leaders that he's very confident that Ukraine aid is going to get across the finish line on Capitol Hill. And all of us were scratching our heads and asking questions of White House officials. How can the president express confidence on the world stage at this particular moment? The House Speaker is hours away from being deposed. He has no idea who the next House Speaker will be and whether that person will support more funding for Ukraine. And sure enough, it is now 24 hours later, and the president himself is apparently concerned enough that he feels the need to go out there and give a major speech at some point, they haven't told us when, to try to get Congress back on track on this issue.
As our conversations throughout the show have made abundantly clear, Nancy, there are so many unanswerable questions. One of them is, in this context of the future of Ukraine aid, might the White House find itself in a position at some point, a week or so from now, where it's urging Democrats to possibly be more cooperative in this House chaotic period of time to get a speaker and create alliances that for the sake of Ukraine aid might come together, if only temporarily?
You know, I think the Democrats would be very open to forming alliances, particularly if there was a speaker candidate who was willing to give them some assurances. They've expressed great openness to doing that. But the reality is that the Republicans who have stepped forward so far to say that they are interested in the speakership, they are not individuals who are going to be looking to form those kinds of alliances with Democrats, at least not yet. I mean, if we get 6 votes, 10 votes into this thing and there's still no speaker, then maybe they may need to form some kind of an alliance with Democrats. But at this point, when you've got individuals like Steve Scalise, like Jim Jordan, they're going to be looking to shore up their right flank. They're going to be looking to try to win this vote with Republican votes only before they turn to Democrats. And as you've been discussing, if anything, they've been saying that they want to kick Democrats out of their small offices in the Capitol, not form new alliances with them.
Hard to form alliances when eviction notices are being sent across the aisle in Capitol Hill. Nancy Cordes at the White House on the North Lawn. Thanks so very much. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Here's something you're probably already aware of. You're streaming CBS News.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their